The summer sun beamed over the McCullen Ranch, golden fields swaying like ripples on water. The rebuilt barn stood tall and proud, a symbol of healing, sweat, and second chances. Chickens clucked freely in the yard. Horses kicked up dust as they galloped through the paddock. And at the heart of it all stood Anastasia, no longer a girl in rags with broken English, but a woman full of grace, strength, and quiet joy. Inside the farmhouse, laughter echoed off the walls. Caleb stood in front of the mirror, awkwardly tugging at the collar of his best shirt. "Too tight," he muttered. Anastasia appeared in the doorway, veil in hand, eyes twinkling. "No tight. Just right," she said, smoothing his collar gently. He stared at her, how her dress shimmered like dewdrops, how her cheeks glowed with a soft blush. "You look like a dream," he whispered. She smiled, leaning into his chest. "I look like your wife." The wedding was held beneath the mesquite tree at the edge of the ranch, the very tree where Caleb had first kissed her hand and called her angel. Wild flowers lined the aisle, woven into garlands by the ranch hands' daughters. The townspeople came not just out of curiosity, but out of affection. They brought homemade pies, fresh bread, and wedding gifts. Even Mrs. Green, the once gossiping baker's wife, brought a fine blue china teapot. The preacher officiated, but not without first saying, "I was wrong." Love don't speak a language. It just speaks. Caleb spoke his vows with quiet certainty. "I thought I lost the best part of me when my first wife died. I was wrong. You were waiting across an ocean sent not by agency, but by God." Anastasia, voice trembling, replied, "I come to America for husband, but I find more. I find home. I find heart. Then quietly, I find you." Cheers burst through the air. Caleb kissed her gently beneath the branches, and the wind carried her veil like a white bird into the sky. Life after the wedding was not a fairy tale, but it was real, strong, whole. Caleb's limp healed slowly, though he still joked he kept it just to gain sympathy. Anastasia became the heart of the ranch. She stitched names on saddle blankets, taught the neighbor girls to make dumplings from her homeland, even began teaching reading lessons to the town's children on Sundays after church. Her accent never faded completely, but it no longer mattered. To the town, her voice became as familiar as the morning bell. To Caleb, it was the only sound that ever brought him peace. One crisp autumn morning, she stepped onto the porch, hand resting on her rounded belly. Caleb came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. "You think it's a girl?" he asked. She grinned. "If girl, she's strong. If boy, he gentle." "Like his mama," he murmured, kissing her cheek. They watched the sunrise together, surrounded by the land that had once been lonely and now thrummed with life. The ranch hands rode out. The animals stirred, and the future whispered its way into the wind. On their first anniversary, the town held a small celebration at the community hall. Caleb stood before the crowd, his hand resting in hers. "I once thought a woman had to sound like us, look like us, be like us to belong. Here," he said. "But then she showed me belonging has nothing to do with words and everything to do with heart." The townsfolk clapped. Anastasia smiled, brushing away tears. Then she whispered, "You once called me angel, but now I feel like wife, mother, woman. I feel whole." And so she remained, never returned to the country that birthed her, because here, in this wild, dusty corner of Texas, she had found something better than the life she'd dreamed of. A man who listened with his soul. A town that grew to love her. A home built on hope and flame and forgiveness. And every time she passed the old station bench, the very one where she'd once sat, alone and humiliated, she smiled gently, because that bench no longer marked her rejection. It marked the beginning of her miracle, the end. The barn stood charred and skeletal, blackened beams reaching toward the sky like the bones of some fallen beast. Smoke still curled up from the embers 2 days after the fire. The ranch, once lively with the hum of daily chores, now moved slow and quiet. Caleb lay inside the house, legs splinted and wrapped tight. Anastasia barely left his side. Every morning she changed the bandage. She brought tea steeped in wild herbs she picked near the creek. And when he winced in pain, she stroked his brow and hummed soft lullabies from her childhood songs her mother used to sing during wars. He called her Angel now without thinking. It was no longer a nickname. It was a truth. The townspeople heard about the fire, heard how she ran into the barn, how she saved the horses, the lambs, and Caleb himself. But they also heard about the arrest. Sheriff Tom Dillard rode out that morning to speak with them both. "Caleb, you know the man who burned your barn?" "Who?" Caleb asked, his jaw tight. "Marcus Lanning. He's the one who wrote to the agency first, the one who rejected her." Caleb's eyes turned to steel. "And now he wants to punish her for that?" The sheriff nodded grimly. "Turns out he followed the train record. Saw her get picked up by you. Couldn't stand it." Anastasia sat nearby, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Will he come back?" she asked. The sheriff shook his head. "He's behind bars. Won't be out for years." Then he added softer, "Ma'am, what you did saving him, saving. The ranch you've earned more than anyone's respect. But not all wounds are soothed with praise." Caleb blamed himself. If he'd paid attention, if he'd just said something sooner, if he hadn't let her walk into that town and become a target. One evening, as she laid out soup beside his bed, he said, "Angel, I brought this on you." She shook her head immediately. "No, you give me home. No one ever give me this." He stared at her a moment, then reached under the blanket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Yellowed, ink faded. "This," he said, voice gravelly, "is the letter I wrote 2 years ago?" She tilted her head. "Letter?" "To the agency. A mail-order bride letter, but I never sent it." He handed it to her. With trembling hands, she unfolded it. The words were simple. "I am a man of few things. I have a ranch, some land. I lost my wife 5 winters ago. I don't know if I can love again, but I know I'm lonely. If there's a woman strong enough for silence, for hard work, for truth, then I'll wait for her, no matter where she comes from." Anastasia read it twice, lips moving quietly as she translated it in her mind. Her eyes shimmered. "You? Wait for me?" she asked. He gave a lopsided smile. "I didn't know it was you, but now I do." That night, as the moon poured silver over the wounded barn, Caleb said softly, "I want to rebuild. Not just the barn, my life. With you?" Anastasia whispered. "I want to." Then, almost shyly, "Even if I always have strange words?" He reached for her hand. "You could speak in riddles, and I'd still know what you mean." The next morning, something changed. Caleb, with her help, stood upright for the first time since the fire. Together, they limped out to the ashes. He handed her a hammer. "I'll hold the nails," he said with a grin. "You're stronger than me anyway." She laughed, really laughed, and it lit the ranch brighter than the Texas sundot they began to rebuild. One beam at a time. Neighbors came, some ashamed of their past words, offering planks and help. The preacher brought timber. The blacksmith repaired the tools. And slowly the ranch began to rise again, not just in structure, but in spirit, a week later, Caleb took her to town again. But this time not to shop. He brought her to the same place where her heart had once broken. The train station. He stood on the wooden platform, took a deep breath, and said, "This is where you were humiliated. This is where you were left alone. I want this to be the place where that ends." He dropped to one knee. People gasped. The preacher stepped out of the crowd. The baker's wife clutched her chest. Anastasia's hands flew to her mouth. "Angel," Caleb said, "you were brought here not by mistake, but by mercy. You saved me. And I don't ever want another day without you. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. She nodded. "Yes, yes, I'm Mary." He slipped a silver ring on her finger, forged by the blacksmith himself. The crowd cheered. Even the preacher's wife smiled, dabbing her eyes. And someone whispered, "He's right. She is an angel." Later that evening, back at the ranch, Caleb whispered, "This fire, it tried to burn us down." "But it only make us stronger," she answered. They stood beneath the mesquite tree, stars blinking above them. The rebuilt barn in the distance. The porch lamp glowed golden. And for the first time since she stepped off that train, Anastasia felt not like a stranger. Not like an outsider, but like someone truly chosen. Sunday morning sun spilled like honey over the chapel steeple. The town was already bustling with movement carriages parked, children skipping, ladies in pressed skirts heading toward church. Caleb McCullen rarely came into town on Sundays. But that week he did dot, and beside him, riding side saddle on a gentle mare, was Anastasia. Her bonnet was simple, her dress clean and modest stitched by her own hands. Her braid was pinned up, her eyes wide with both awe and caution. The town's dusty roads had never seemed so full of silence. People turned. Mouths parted. Mrs. Green, the baker's wife, narrowed her eyes and muttered, "So it's true." He kept. The foreign girl, the preacher's wife, stiffened. A boy pointed. "Mama, she talks funny." His mother yanked his arm and hissed, "Hush." Caleb dismounted and helped her down gently. She smiled nervously, still unfamiliar with so many English words, but she understood stares. She had lived through war. She had lived through famine. She had lived through being forgotten. But none of those had the sting of being looked at like she didn't belong. Inside the church, murmurs fluttered like bats in the rafters. She sat beside Caleb quietly. Listened to the preacher speak of kindness and grace. But the words didn't match the eyes she felt watching her. After service, as Caleb stepped aside to speak with the blacksmith, the preacher approached her, Reverend Dalton. His white beard framed his stern lips like snow around stone. "Miss Anastasia, is it?" She nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." He folded his hands. "You're staying with Mr. McCullen?" "Yes. He give me work. I clean, cook, help. Unmarried?" He pressed. Her face colored. "Yes, but is good. I not make trouble." He leaned in slightly. "Some might say it's improper. That it brings shame." She didn't understand all the words, but she heard the tone. She swallowed and said softly, "I no do wrong. I try be good." He sighed. Trying is not always enough in a Christian town. Then he walked away, leaving her there like a child, left behind after a sermon. Outside, someone whispered as she passed, "If she can't speak like us, how can she think like us?" Another woman hissed, "It ain't natural, him bringing her around like that." Caleb saw it, heard it, and it boiled his blood. On the way home, Anastasia was quiet. She held her hands in her lap, head bowed. "You okay?" Caleb asked. She hesitated. "People no like me. They don't know you," he said. "If they did, they'd thank heaven you're here." She gave him a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Days later, a storm brewed not in the sky, but in town. At the general store, Caleb overheard Mr. Jenkins muttering to another man, "That girl, she's foreign, speaks like a gypsy. How do we know she ain't?" Hiding something? Could be a spy or worse. Shouldn't be up at his ranch. It ain't right. Caleb slammed his supplies on the counter, making both men jump. Don't you worry what's right, he growled. You don't live my life, and you don't know her heart. He rode home hard that day. Found her in the garden planting tomatoes. Hair tied back with a blue ribbon. Humming. He stopped and watched a moment. Then he said, You don't change for them. You hear me? She looked up. I try be like American woman. He shook his head. Don't. I don't want an American woman. I want you. That night, trouble came quietly. No thunder, no howling dogs, just a soft rustling. And then a spark, a flicker, a flame, the barn. It lit like dry kindling, flames curling through the slats, swallowing straw and saddle in seconds. The horses screamed. The sheep panicked. Caleb shouted, grabbing the water pail, yelling, Get back, Angel. But she didn't run. She grabbed the second bucket, and then another. Side by side, they fought the fire. Smoke filled her lungs, her hands blistered. But she didn't stop. A beam cracked. Caleb shoved her aside just as it fell. His leg caught under splintered wood. She screamed, yanked, pulled, managed to free him, drag him out just before the barn collapsed. Flames roared behind them. And she sobbed, not from fear, but because the animals, they were still trapped. She stood. I go. You'll die. Caleb rasped, grabbing her wrist. She looked into his eyes. Then I die. But I try. And she went into the fire. Into the smoke, and one by one, she came out with a foal. With a calf. With the last of the lambs dot by morning, her hands were raw. Her dress was singed. Her hair smelled of smoke. But the ranch still stood, and the animals were safe. And Caleb, though hurt, was alive. The doctor came, set his leg. Anastasia never left his side. The sheriff arrived too. Investigated the fire. Turned out it was arson. The evidence led to the same man who had ordered Anastasia before Caleb, the one who rejected her. Jealous, angry, he was arrested. But no apology could take back the fear or the loss. That evening, as Caleb lay in bed, leg elevated, bandaged tight, Anastasia brought him water. He took her hand and didn't let go. I'm sorry this happened, he said softly. She shook her head. Not your fault. You saved me, he whispered. You saved me too, she replied. There was a long silence. Then he said, Angel, I don't care what anyone thinks. You belong here. You belong with me. Her breath hitched. But I have accent. I don't hear it anymore. He said, All I hear is you. From the ashes of fire came something stronger than stone. Not just trust, not just survival, but love, real, quiet, unshakable. The rooster crowed softly before dawn. The Texas sky blushed orange, casting long shadows across the quiet land. On the McCullen Ranch, silence ruled the morning until the old barn doors creaked open. Inside the house, Caleb stirred from sleep, the scent of something unfamiliar drifting into his room. He stepped out, boots thudding softly on the wooden floor, and stopped. The kitchen, usually untouched by anyone but him, was glowing with warmth. At the stove stood Anastasia, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, carefully flipping thick slices of pan-fried bread. A steaming pot of coffee rested beside a plate of sliced apples and cheese. She turned when she heard him. Good morning? Her voice held hope and hesitation. Caleb blinked, taken aback. Morning. You didn't have to. I want help, she said firmly. You let me stay. I work. He watched her a long second, then gave a small nod. The toast was crispy, the coffee strong, and though the silence between them lingered, it was no longer heavy, it was comfortable. Days passed. Anastasia rose early each morning, before the sun touched the windows. She swept the floor, scrubbed dishes until they gleamed, mended torn clothes with practiced hands. The barn, once thick with cobwebs and dust, grew orderly under her care. She didn't ask for rest. She didn't ask for anything, Caleb noticed. He'd rise and find fresh bread baked. Come home to see the goats herded in. Watch her kneel by the creek, rinsing clothes, humming soft foreign tunes to herself that night. He'd see her at the window, staring at the moon like it was the only friend she'd ever known. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, but her actions sang louder than any words. One afternoon, thunder cracked across the sky. A storm rolled in heavy and fast. A newborn lamb had gone missing, lost in the rocky pasture. Caleb grabbed his coat, ready to search. But by the time he opened the gate, he saw her. Anastasia, soaked through, coat fluttering like a flag, stumbling through the brush with the lamb in her arms. She fell once, twice, but rose again, cradling the little creature. Like a baby. When she reached him, she was shivering, drenched, but smiling. Found, she said simply. Cold, but live. He took the lamb from her arms, placed it gently in the straw, then turned to her, stunned. No one would have gone out in that mess, he said. She shrugged. I know, leave baby alone. He stared at her, really looked at her. Hair tangled, dress torn. But her eyes held something holy, something stubborn. And in that moment, he whispered, not meaning to say it aloud, you're not a burden. You're an angel. Anastasia blinked. Angel? He looked away quickly, clearing his throat. Just? You're good, that's all. But the word lingered like perfume in the air between them. Angel. Over time, she made the ranch bloom. She planted herbs near the window, sang softly to the chickens who followed her like children. She stitched curtains from old cloth, braided rope, tamed the wildest goat like magic. Caleb tried to stay distant. He didn't want to hope. Didn't want to believe that maybe, just maybe, this strange girl had been sent not just to his doorstep, but to his soul. One night, as he sat on the porch with his coffee, she joined him with a blanket over her shoulders. The stars above shimmered in silence. She pointed. In my country, that star means love. He looked up. And what does this sky mean to you? She thought a long time. Then said, new, strange, but home. But not everyone was welcoming. Word spread fast. The townsfolk began to whisper, she's still living out there? Didn't marry him, did she? Don't she sound funny? One Sunday she accompanied him into town for supplies. As they stepped into the general store, the room fell quiet. Mothers gathered their children close. An old man muttered, we speak English here. Caleb glared, but Anastasia only smiled. Politely, not understanding. She asked the storekeeper gently, flour and salt? The man hesitated before slowly handing it over, muttering, you people ought to learn proper first. Outside she didn't complain, but Caleb's jaw clenched. He saw the way her hand shook when she tied the bags to the horse. She said nothing, but he heard everything. That night, a note was found pinned to the ranch gate. Crude handwriting. She don't belong. Send her back where she came from. Anastasia found it first. She stood there a long time, eyes on the paper, lips trembling. When Caleb rode up and saw her holding it, his heart cracked in two. She turned to him. I leave. Maybe. Better. For you. He dismounted, grabbed the note, crushed it in his fist. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. You hear me? She looked away, ashamed. I try, but they hate. He stepped closer, took her hand. I don't care what they think. You were sent here for a reason. My ranch is better with you here. I'm better with you here. Her eyes filled with tears. You no hate my talk? He smiled gently. Your words? They got more heart than anything I've heard in years." From that day, he called her by a new name, not foreign, not strange, not unwanted. He called her Angel. And for the first time in her life, Anastasia began to believe it might be true. The night hung heavy over the lonely Texas station. Wind curled through the boards, whispering like a voice too tired to speak loud. Anastasia remained seated on the bench, clutching her bag, her fingers numb despite the warm night. The stars above blinked through the deep purple of the sky, and still no one returned. She hadn't eaten since morning. Her stomach twisted painfully, but worse was the ache in her chest. She had been sent for, promised a husband, a future. Now she was stranded, a burden in a land that couldn't even pronounce her name. At the edge of town, on the dark dirt road that led away from civilization, hoofbeats echoed softly again. The same man from earlier, Caleb McCullen, returned. Only now the town was nearly asleep, stores closed, lamps dimmed. Only the station still held a flicker of light and the lone figure of the rejected bride. He stopped some feet away and watched her for a moment. She didn't notice him, too lost in her thoughts. She looked like she'd folded in on herself, as if she were trying to disappear. There was something about her posture, her stillness. It wasn't just fear. It was exhaustion. He dismounted. His boots crunched against the gravel. Anastasia startled, clutching her bag close. Her eyes darted up wide, glassy, uncertain. Caleb raised his hand slowly. "Didn't mean to scare you, miss." She blinked at him, tried to process his words. Her English was not perfect, but she understood miss. "No." "Is okay," she said softly, unsure if she'd even said it right. He nodded toward the bench. "Been out here all day?" She nodded. "Man, he no want. I wait ... but no place now." Her accent was thick, vowels curling over her tongue like unfamiliar cloth. Caleb glanced toward the station. No help there. Then he looked back at her. Her face was tired, but proud. No tears now. She'd used them all up. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You got a name?" She stood slowly and held out the crumpled letter with both hands. "Let her say, 'Come to marry. I, Anastasia.'" He took the paper, scanned it. The name on it wasn't his, but the agency letter was familiar. He'd thought about writing one like it once. He never had the courage. "Anastasia," he repeated. The way he said it sounded softer. She looked up, surprised someone tried to say it properly. "You? Got anywhere to go?" he asked. She hesitated. "No, no money. No food. Just wait." He nodded again, slower this time. "Well, you can't stay out here all night." He jerked his thumb toward his horse. "Got a spare room. It's quiet, clean, no funny business. You can rest there a while." Anastasia looked at him like he had offered her a miracle. But she didn't move right away. "You want help?" she asked cautiously. Caleb paused. "Let's just say I don't like seeing good people left out in the dark." And with that, he gently took her bag and helped her mount behind him on his horse. She'd never ridden like that before, holding on to a stranger in the night, heading into the unknown. But for the first time in days, she wasn't walking alone. The ride to the ranch was long, silent. Crickets sang beneath the moon, and the horse trotted slow and steady down the dusty road. Caleb didn't ask questions. He wasn't the type. But he did glance over his shoulder now and then, checking to see if she was still holding on. She was. Tightly. When they reached his ranch, the house stood quietly beneath the stars. A plain structure, wood faded by sun and time. But it stood, strong, and it was home. He led her inside, opened the door to a guest room. It was small but clean. The sheets smelled faintly of cedar and soap. "You can sleep here," he said. "There's water in the pitcher." some bread and apples in the kitchen. I'll leave you be." She nodded, murmuring, "Thank you, I no forget." He paused at the door. "Ain't much, but you're safe here." Then, with a nod, he left her in peace. Anastasia stood in the room for a long time. Her hands trembled as she touched the bed. She hadn't slept in one since she'd boarded the ship from Europe. Doubt she sank onto it, closed her eyes. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't cry herself to sleep from fear. She slept deeply, wrapped in quiet. Elsewhere in the house, Caleb stood at his window, looking out at the night. He poured himself a drink, took a sip, then stared into the dark. He didn't know her story, didn't know why he'd stopped. But he'd felt something when he saw her, something he hadn't felt in a long time, like maybe his home wasn't meant to stay empty forever. The train screeched as it pulled into the tiny, wind-blown station near El Paso, Texas. Dust kicked up in dry clouds, wrapping around the boots of cowboys and the bonnets of waiting women. Inside the last passenger car, a young woman sat with her gloved hands wrapped tightly around a worn leather case. Her name was Anastasia Zalewska, and she had journeyed from a distant corner of Europe through frost, through fear, and now through fire. She stepped off the train with her head bowed, slightly, the hem of her dress brushing against the wooden platform. She wore a thick coat that was too warm for Texas heat, and her lace-up boots had long since lost their shine. Clutched to her chest was a crumpled letter, the English words barely understood but memorized by heart. The letter had promised marriage, home, love, a new beginning. But what greeted her was silence, stares, and a disappointed groan from the man waiting. A tall, red-faced fellow with a crooked mustache and dusty hat pushed past the onlookers. You ain't what I expected," he muttered, his eyes narrowing at her traditional shawl, the foreign jewelry around her neck. She tried to smile. "I come for Mary. You?" "Write me," she said in broken English. He scoffed, looked her up and down, then turned to the crowd. "This here ain't what the agency showed me. Said she'd speak English proper. Said she was Americanized." A few townsfolk chuckled. One woman whispered loudly, "Mail order mess." Should have known better. Anastasia's heart pounded. Her hands trembled. I speak. I work hard. But he raised a hand to silence her. "Don't care. I ain't marrying no foreign girl that sounds like a dang crow choking on molasses." He spat on the ground and walked away, muttering, "Should sue that agency." She stood frozen, her case beside her boots, her future disintegrating into the red Texas dust. The train pulled away, leaving her behind. The platform cleared out. The sun dipped lower, casting shadows that felt like judgment. No one came to help. Not the station master, who just muttered something and returned to his office. Not the other mail-order brides who had been claimed by their new husbands and now glanced at her, with a mixture of pity and relief that it wasn't them. Anastasia moved to the bench near the far end of the platform. She sat down slowly, afraid even the wood might reject her. A child passed by and asked his mother, "Why's that lady talking funny?" The mother shushed him harshly, giving Anastasia a look that said, "Go home." But she had no home. Her village, back in Poland, had sent her away with the last of their savings. She was supposed to marry, send money back, start a life. Instead, she sat alone, stomach hollow, eyes glassy, her world unraveling in a place that didn't even know her name. The sky began to change colors, pale blue to orange, then a deepening purple. Night in Texas came quick. She pulled her coat tighter around her and tried not to cry. "God," she whispered in her own tongue, "did you bring me here to die?" A tumbleweed rolled across the dirt road in front of the station. Crickets began their nightly song. And still no one came, until the clop of hooves, slow, steady. A single rider approached from the west, silhouetted by the sun. Tall in the saddle, quiet, watchful. He pulled his horse to a stop beside the platform, observing the nearly empty station. He wasn't a man of many words. He rarely came into town unless he had to. His name was Caleb McCullen, a widowed rancher with no patience for town gossip or company. But that night, something tugged at his gut. A feeling. A whisper in the wind. He saw her sitting there small, hunched, out of place like a bird that had flown into a storm. He asked the station master, "Who's that girl?" The old man shrugged. "Mail order bride. Rejected. Foreign. Can't even say her name proper." Caleb watched a long time. Didn't speak. Didn't move. But something shifted in his chest when he saw her wipe her cheek with the back of her glove dot as he rode away into the dark. He couldn't shake the thought. Why did that girl look so much like an angel abandoned by the world?